When the Chinese billionaire made fun of the black waiter, everyone laughed until the waiter answered in Chinese. "Look at that monkey, serving our table," Li Wei exclaimed in Mandarin, gesturing to the server as though he were an ornament. The laughing from the table reverberated throughout the Jade Palace, Manhattan's most upscale dining establishment. "I bet he doesn't even know how to hold chopsticks properly. People like him should be cleaning toilets, not serving civilized people like us." The 5 American executives were anxious to impress the woman who ran a $60 billion enterprise. So they laughed nervously, without understanding a word. As though he hadn't heard a single venomous word, David Thompson's expression remained neutral as he proceeded to serve wine. He was 32 years old and had spent the previous 8 months learning to put up with such humiliations on a daily basis. This time, however, a new thing was there in his eyes, a perilous serenity that only those who have survived far more severe storms can possess. One of the wealthiest women in Asia, Li Wei, was in New York to finalize import agreements for technology for Wei Industries. Even among billionaires, her conceit was notorious. She regarded black people as if they were a lower species, and Americans like naive kids. She continued in Mandarin, relishing each scathing utterance, that one probably didn't even finish high school. He believes that providing work to people like that is a step forward in the United States. What a farce. Every racial epithet, every mocking remark, every act of cultural superiority, all of it was understood by David. Li Wei was unaware, however, that this monkey had a master's degree in Asian studies from Harvard, was fluent in Mandarin, and had worked for 5 years as a cultural assistant at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. David had been one of America's top authorities on Sino-U.S. relations, Dr. David Thompson, 8 months prior. When she was wrongfully accused of giving China access to diplomatic material, her life fell apart. The floodgates to the academic world closed, notwithstanding her complete exoneration. Even if the FBI had unfairly probed someone, no one wanted to hire them. In terrible English, Li Wei requested more wine, purposefully mispronouncing things as though speaking perfectly would make her less than the locals. David observed that she deliberately avoided making eye contact with him while serving in silence. Why, after all, recognize an inferior's humanity? David kept the eerie composure of someone with a secret too potent to be shared before the perfect moment. Even as everyone publicly ridiculed him, Li Wei was going to learn that the biggest mistake a person can make in their life is to underestimate someone based only on their skin color. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this tale of justice and retribution. You'll learn how a straightforward, humiliating night could become the most costly lesson a billionaire has ever paid. Torturing a helpless animal was something Li Wei was enjoying like a narcissistic child. Even the American businessman shifted uneasily in her chairs as she transformed dinner into a show of racial humiliation over the course of the next 40 minutes. "This monkey must think he'll get a nice tip tonight," she added in Mandarin while seeming to reposition her napkin. While David presented the appetizer, the 5 businessmen laughed uneasily, not understanding a word but feeling that something terrible was taking place. In the United States, they think he thinks giving money solves the problem of racial inferiority. How naive, they said. The CEO of the biggest electronics importer on the East Coast, Robert Hayes, made multiple attempts to divert the conversation. But Li Wei consistently brought David back into the spotlight. "You Americans are pitiful," she added. Mandarin and English are now alternated. "You believe that giving these folks legitimate jobs is a step forward for society. But take a look at him. He shakes so much that he can't even hold a tray." Fear was not trembling David. Her hands trembled with repressed anger as she recalled how 9 months prior he had eaten dinner in Washington with a Chinese ambassador, herself, to talk billion-dollar trade agreements. Li Wei was most likely spending the money he got from his father at a socialite party in Shanghai. At the time, David had been brutally and strategically brought down. The leading American authority on Chinese business culture was Dr. David Thompson. At colleges all across the world, her PhD thesis on diplomatic procedures in Sino-American relations was essential reading. He was already managing government-to-government negotiations and fluently speaking Mandarin at the age of 30. When Marcus Sterling, a jealous co-worker at the State Department, created fictitious documents implying that David was giving Beijing access to private information, everything came apart. The FBI's inquiry took 7 months to complete. 7 months of friends abandoning you, dramatic headlines, and public humiliation. It was too late when the evidence against him turned out to be blatantly fraudulent and he was fully cleared. Even if someone had been unfairly investigated for espionage, no one in the diplomatic community wanted to recruit them. Naturally, Marcus Sterling was given the promotion that David was due. Li Wei commanded in shaky English, "Bring the bill," as though speaking properly would be humiliating, and introduce myself as Li Wei from Wei Industries to the young girl. "Perhaps he has seen my family on TV." David nearly choked. Wei Industries Li Wei. The same Li Wei with whom he had coordinated trade delegation visits through official emails. For 3 years, the same Li Wei who had referred to him as the American who truly understood our culture and openly appreciated his efforts at the embassy. She didn't recognize him, of course. David, who wore $3,000 outfits at the time, was in the same social circles as her. For someone like Li Wei, he was just another black employee servicing her table in his black waiter's costume, making him undetectable. Savoring every venomous word, she added in Mandarin, "You know what the problem with Americans is? You believe that democracy entails equality for all. In actuality, however, there are great and inferior individuals. It is the way things naturally are." She pointed right at David. For instance, that person lives in an apartment with 10 other people and most likely has children from 3 separate fathers. These folks live in ignorance and promiscuity like that. Robert Hayes was clearly uneasy. "Li Wei, perhaps we ought to concentrate on the contracts." She intervened with a jeweled hand, saying, "No, no. Allow me to conclude my course on American sociology. When you do business with us, you must be aware of who you are dealing with." David's expression remained neutral as he continued to serve. But on the inside, every word was recorded and stored. Li Wei was unaware that every insult, discriminatory act, and display of cultural haughtiness she made was causing her own demise. Her request for David to approach the table was the worst. She pointed as though she were calling a dog and said, "You, in English, what is your name?" "David, ma'am." "David," she said again, trying the name out on her tongue, as though it were a bad taste. "David, are you familiar with China? Are you aware of its location on the map?" The businessmen were petrified. The situation had gone beyond all limits of acceptable embarrassment, even for men accustomed to the ruthless world of international business. "Yes, ma'am," David replied calmly. Li Wei laughed loudly. "How cute, he knows where China is." She turned to the table, speaking in Mandarin. "I would bet my fortune that this monkey has never set foot outside New York in his life." It was at that moment that something changed in the air of the restaurant. David stopped writing down the order and looked directly into Li Wei's eyes for the first time that night. It wasn't submission. It wasn't fear. It was something much more dangerous. It was recognition. Each new humiliation only fueled a silent strength growing inside his cold determination, being forged by the very injustice they were trying to impose on him. What that arrogant billionaire couldn't see was that every racial slur was writing his own sentence of defeat, word by word, humiliation by humiliation. During the break between dinner and dessert, while Li Wei continued to spew insults in Mandarin to entertain the American businessmen, David headed to the employee bathroom with a calmness that contrasted with a storm brewing inside him. "That monkey probably can't even count to 100, she said in Mandarin when David was out of sight. "I bet the whole family lives on food stamps and government assistance. That's how that inferior race survives in the United States." Robert Hayes was visibly nauseated. "Li Wei, this is going too far. Too far," she laughed. "You Americans are so sensitive. In China, we know how to deal with every type of person in his proper place. That's the difference between a civilization that's thousands of years old and a country that's only 200 years old." Meanwhile, in the staff bathroom, David took out his cell phone and began typing a message that would change everything. The recipient was Dr. James Chen, his former mentor at Columbia University, now director of the Center for Asian Studies and one of the most respected Chinese Americans in New York. James, I need an urgent favor. I'm at the Jade Palace in Manhattan, and I just witnessed something that may be of interest to the Chinese diplomatic community. Li Wei of Wei Industries is here making extreme racist comments, thinking that no one understands Mandarin. I have everything recorded. Can we meet tomorrow? The reply came in less than 2 minutes. My God, David, where have you been all this time? Yes, let's meet. Li Wei is under internal investigation in China for corruption and unethical behavior abroad. Her comments could be exactly what we need. David smiled for the first time in months. Dr. Chen didn't know he was working as a waiter. In the message, David had identified himself only as a witness to the events. His mentor still knew him as the brilliant diplomat he had been. When David returned to the hall, Li Wei had escalated her humiliation campaign to a level that made even the most callous businessmen shift uncomfortably. She was speaking in deliberately broken English, imitating accents she considered inferior. You know how to clear a table properly, she said to David in childish English, as if she were talking to a child. Or do you only know how to carry plates like a trained monkey? The businessmen fell into a deathly silence. Even for men accustomed to the cruelty of international business, this was unacceptable. But none of them had the courage to confront a woman who controlled billion-dollar contracts. I can clear the table perfectly, ma'am, David replied with a calmness that contrasted with the violence of her words. How cute, she laughed loudly. He can speak properly. Perhaps he's not as stupid as he seems. Li Wei made the error that would end his life when she pulled out her cell phone and started making a video, narrating in Mandarin. Did you see that? She asked the businessman. When you treat these people firmly, they learn how to behave. I'm here at the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan, showing how Americans educate their black workers. Look how quiet he is when I speak with authority. David continued cleaning the table, but internally, every second of that video was being catalogued as evidence. Li Wei was documenting his own downfall, creating video evidence of his racial and cultural arrogance. In China, she continued recording, we know that each race has its natural function. Black Americans are good for manual labor, but never for leadership or intelligence. It's basic biology. Robert Hayes stood up abruptly. Excuse me, I need to make a call. He left the table clearly upset, followed by 2 other businessmen. The situation had crossed all boundaries of tolerance. Li Wei interpreted their departure as tacit approval. Did you see how it works? When you establish a clear hierarchy, even Americans understand, she continued recording. This waiter here is a perfect example of how to maintain social order. He knows exactly where his place is in the world. David finished clearing the table and stood respectfully to the side, waiting for instructions. But his eyes no longer showed submission. There was something different there, a growing intensity that Li Wei was too busy with her performance to notice. Over the next 20 minutes, she created a complete file of evidence against herself. Comments about Chinese racial superiority, insults, directed specifically at Black Americans. Theories about a natural hierarchy between races, and clear demonstrations of discrimination based on skin color. You know what the problem with America is? You give too many rights to people who should just serve, she remarked in Mandarin while continuing to record. For instance, that waiter over there most likely believes he should be paid the same as those of us with education. At that moment, David made a choice that would not only alter her life, but also possibly the business relationship between 2 superpowers. He surreptitiously pulled out his own cell phone and started filming her, creating a video within a video that captured not only the words, but also the look of cruel pleasure on her face as she degraded another person. People like you, Li Wei added in Mandarin, pointing specifically at David, should be thankful for any employment at all. We used to say, a dog that barks doesn't bite. But a dog that doesn't bark doesn't think either. When I was a student in China, David kept his expression neutral. But internally, he was compiling not just evidence, but strategies. Every insult would be documented. Every display of prejudice would be catalogued. Every moment of arrogance would be preserved for the reckoning that would come. What Lawaya couldn't see was that with every poisonous word, she was not only digging her own professional grave, but potentially creating an international diplomatic incident. David knew exactly which Chinese and American organizations would be interested in that material. "Tomorrow, I'm going to post this on my social media," she said in Mandarin, ending the recording. "My followers in China will find it hilarious to see how Americans allow this kind of people to work in decent places." David smiled subtly. Li Wei was right about one thing. Someone would definitely find those videos very interesting, but it wouldn't be his followers on social media. As she put her phone away, satisfied with her cruel performance, David continued serving with the patience of a man who knows that true justice sometimes needs to be prepared slowly, like a fine dish being carefully seasoned before being served. What that arrogant billionaire couldn't imagine was that every second of humiliation she had inflicted was being turned into ammunition for a battle she didn't even know had begun. And when the war finally erupted, she would discover that she had chosen the wrong opponent at the wrong time, using the wrong weapons against someone who played at a completely different level than her. Li Wei was finishing her third glass of expensive champagne when she decided to take her cruel performance to the grand finale. The few American businessmen remaining at the table were visibly uncomfortable, but she interpreted this as admiration for her cultural superiority. "You know what?" she said in Mandarin, looking directly at David. "I'm going to teach this monkey a lesson about social hierarchy." She turned to David and said in broken English, You know how to dance like a monkey. I'd want to witness a humorous show." David Thompson made the choice that would alter everything at that very moment. For the first time that night, he straightened his shoulders, stopped clearing the table, and smiled. A smile that made Robert Hayes choke on his wine. "Li Wei," David said, in flawless Mandarin, her pronunciation more elegant than his. "I think you are confusing this establishment with a zoo." The silence that descended upon the restaurant was deafening, and Li Wei was completely paralyzed, his face turning every shade of white that could be imagined. David's words, delivered in a fluent Mandarin, were like lightning striking her in the chest. "What were you saying?" I remarked. "It's interesting how some people confuse money with education, birth with character, and social status with human value." She stumbled in English, her conceit vanishing like water in the desert. David continued in classical Mandarin, her fluency indicating years of academic study. You speak Chinese," Li Wei whispered, her voice barely audible. "Classical Mandarin, modern Mandarin, Cantonese, and 3 regional dialects," David calmly replied, now alternating between English and Mandarin, in addition to English, French, and a little Japanese. The American businessmen were stunned. Robert Hayes, who had worked with Chinese interpreters for years, recognized right away that David not only spoke Mandarin, but had mastered dialects and nuances that only someone with a higher education could achieve. But based on our talk over the past 90 minutes, I'm sure you've already noticed that for Li Wei the realization was like a kick to the gut. 90 minutes, every racial epithet, every act of bigotry, every nasty remark she had said to him, in Mandarin, he had comprehended. "That's impossible," she stumbled as she tried to gather herself. David affirmed, "I am a waiter," in a firm but non-aggressive tone. "You're just a black American waiter." He stopped to give the information. "Time to register. But I am also Dr. David Thompson with a PhD in Asian Studies from Harvard University, specializing in Sino-American relations and Chinese business culture. I was a cultural attaché in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing for 5 years. In addition to publishing 17 scholarly studies on Chinese diplomatic protocol, I oversaw commercial delegations between our nations." Robert Hayes got up, almost toppling his chair. "You're David Thompson, my God." Her thesis on Chinese investment in U.S. infrastructure was read by me. "A year ago, you vanished from the diplomatic scene. The world seemed to be whirling around Li Wei. However, why do you work as a waiter? David answered, because sometimes life teaches us lessons in humility. The FBI unjustly charged me of spying. The doors to the diplomatic world had already closed by the time I was cleared totally. He gave her a direct glance. In order to survive, I took this job, and for 8 months I was humiliated every day by individuals like you who spoke Mandarin and assumed I didn't comprehend. David pulled his phone from his pocket. Remarks concerning my ethnicity, my IQ, beliefs regarding the inherent hierarchy of peoples, and whole ideologies regarding superiority based on skin color and nationality. Li Wei's face grew green as he recognized where this was headed. You wouldn't risk documenting everything. David grinned. I did, of course. Every insult, instance of discrimination, and instance of racial haughtiness. Including the video you produced in which you outlined your beliefs regarding black inferiority and Chinese supremacy. Li Wei was thoroughly humiliated. David wasn't. Done though, actually, Ms. Li Wei. I think we are professional acquaintances. Her company participated in 3 SNOBBISH investment conferences that I organized. He stopped abruptly. In 2022, she participated in 2 of my video chats. Naturally, I was dressed in a suit and conversing with ambassadors on an equal footing. That you didn't recognize me serving at his table makes sense. Li Wei opened his mouth to say something, but the words would not come. In addition to being fully exposed, she learned that the man who had humiliated her that night was a diplomat, who had negotiated deals that had an impact on her own business. I spent 3 years negotiating trade agreements between the United States and China, including some contracts that directly benefited Weir Industries, David added. Displaying the natural authority of someone used to running meeting rooms, you claimed that people like me don't understand international politics. The American executives were completely stunned. At last, they realized that they had been silently witnessing an uneducated billionaire ethnically insult one of the leading American experts on Chinese culture for the entire evening, or her. In a calm but deadly tone, David added, "You have also developed several theories about intellectual capacity based on race. It would be intriguing to see how his Chinese Communist Party would react to a Chinese entrepreneur espousing racial superiority notions in the United States." At last, Li Wei found her voice. "You can't. It would destroy her standing in the family business, her reputation, and his foreign contracts." David ended softly. "I think so, particularly in light of China's severe regulations on its citizens who cause embarrassment to the nation overseas." David pulled out his cell phone and showed Li Wei the screen. Robert Hayes, still reeling from the news, mumbled, "Louis, you humiliated one of America's leading experts on your own culture. A copy of the tapes has already been forwarded to Dr. James Chen, who is the head of the Center for Asian Studies in Columbia." The subject piqued his interest, to put it mildly. A message from Dr. Chin appeared on the screen. "This is explosive, David. This must be seen right away by the Chinese consulate. Li Wei might have caused a diplomatic crisis on a global scale. I also forwarded it to the American Chinese Business Association." David went on gently. "When it comes to member conduct abroad, they have a fairly stringent code of ethics." Li Wei was drenched in sweat. Because her business relied on foreign contracts, any racial controversy may result in billions of dollars in lost business. Even worse, those who caused diplomatic issues were not tolerated by the Chinese government. "Please," she said, in a whisper, her haughtiness vanished. David's inquiry reverberated throughout the quiet restaurant. "I didn't know who he was, and that would justify his treatment, if he were really just a waiter," he said. "Is a degree or a bank account a prerequisite for human dignity?" The manager of the restaurant, who had been observing from afar, came up to the table. "I didn't know his background," he replied with newfound respect. "Mr. Thompson, our policy will be significantly different from now on." David gave a nod. "Thank you. It's not about me though. It's about how we treat those we believe to be different when we believe our actions will go unpunished." Li Wei made one final attempt. "Perhaps we can reach a consensus, Dr. Thompson, a deal." David gave a sorrowful smile. Li Wei Ms. Dozens of others, including you, degraded him for 8 months, believing him to be only another unsophisticated employee. All the insults were listed, all documented instances of discrimination. He placed his phone away. Now, all I want is for her to depart, knowing that a black American man he viewed as trash had ruined her mind, and may she remember that lesson for the rest of her life. With shaky knees, Li Wei rose from the table, her haughtiness giving way to sheer terror. She was aware that her career would end when those videos made way to the appropriate people in China and the US. David demonstrated that genuine strength comes from character rather than wealth or prestige, by being composed and dignified until the very end. One question lingered as Li Wei walked out of the restaurant, still reeling from the biggest humiliation of her life. Could someone so enmeshed in bigotry possibly learn anything? Or do some people just have to discover the hard way that being arrogant always has a cost? Their lives had radically transformed 3 months after that night at Jade Palace, but in completely different ways. Li Wei awoke to heartbreaking headlines once more. According to the Wall Street Journal, billionaire Aries loses $800 million in contracts as a result of racist films. In just 2 weeks, Wei Industries lost 70% of his US contracts after the Chinese consulate officially distanced itself from her comments. The family has decided that you need some time to reflect, his uncle remarked in Mandarin during a heated video chat. His executive privileges are suspended indefinitely. The queen-like woman was going home as a corporate outcast after arriving in New York. David Thompson, meanwhile, had achieved worldwide fame. With more than 50 million views on the video of the altercation, he became a worldwide icon of dignity in the face of discrimination. He was invited to speak at universities across 3 nations, and the State Department offered her previous job back with a promotion and a 60% pay increase. In a CNN interview, David clarified that it wasn't about retaliation. It was intended to demonstrate the value of human dignity and the unexpected places where education may be discovered. He committed to going back to diplomacy, but he continued to work at Jade Palace 1 day a week, this time as a minority partner and senior advisor. The eatery became a destination for human rights advocates. The location where a waiter taught a billionaire humility was visited by customers from all around the world. The David Thompson Protocol, which forbids discrimination in businesses, was established as a result of the initiative. Li Wei recorded a video apology as part of her last public appeal, which only made matters worse for her. "I apologize," she replied in shaky English, "for my unfortunate remarks." However, social media was ruthless and not regrettably racist. His only reason for apologizing is that he was discovered. Character is not purchased by privilege. 6 months later, David met Robert Hayes, a businessman who had seen it all, at a symposium on corporate diversity. The most costly lesson a billionaire has ever learned is that money cannot buy dignity, and prejudice always takes its toll. If this story, about dignity, overcoming adversity, and justice touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. How would he respond if he witnessed a situation like this? Together, we can spread the message that respect is not a privilege but a fundamental human right. David, you taught us that underestimating people is the biggest business mistake there is, Hayes said, shaking his hand with genuine respect. Li Wei, meanwhile, lived in seclusion in Shanghai, his arrogance replaced by social isolation. Friends avoided her, contracts were cancelled, and his reputation never recovered.